Well, hello, and thank you for joining EarthEcho's STEMExplore Virtual Career Connection featuring Elena Green, a student studying conservation criminology at Michigan State University. My name is Olivia Blondheim, and I am a PhD student at the University of South Florida, and I'm also a member of EarthEcho International's Youth Leadership Council and Board of Directors. EarthEcho International is a nonprofit founded on the belief that youth have the power to change the planet. Our free programs and resources have reached more than 2 million people in 146 countries. We strive to empower young people to become leaders and problem solvers in their communities and around the world. This event is part of STEMExplore, EarthEcho's program that brings inspiration to life by telling the stories of dynamic female professionals in STEM careers. We also want to thank our program sponsor, Raytheon Technologies, for their support of women in STEM. And just a reminder that you can send in questions anytime for our expert. If you're joining in Zoom, please use the Q&A feature. And if you're on YouTube, please use the comment section to ask your questions of our expert. Now let's get started by introducing our STEMexplore mentor, Elena Green. Elena, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hello. It's nice to virtually meet all of you. As I said, my name is Elena Green. I am currently a fourth-year undergraduate at Michigan State University, and I'm located out of East Lansing, even given COVID-19. I am studying zoology, and I also have a minor in women's and gender studies. And I guess a fun fact is I spent my freshman year at a small school in Vermont. So if there's any people from Vermont, I've been there. But it's really exciting to be here with all of you.
Absolutely, and we're so excited to hear more about your journey. And so first of all, let's get started. So my first question for you is, what do you do for a living?
So that's kind of a funny question because I am a student, but I'm also working and doing research full time. And this picture here was actually from a conference I was able to go to and present my research this past February. So I went to Limuru, Kenya, and I was also fortunate enough to be able to go and visit the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. And these experiences have largely come from my research experiences, and I've gotten so many opportunities that kind of expand like what I do as a student and then what I do as a professional. So myself as a student, taking classes in herpetology and gender in the environment and social sciences, but then with my work, I'm doing work on education and doing work on conservation criminology and human environment interaction. So a little mix of everything, and it's very different day to day what I'm doing.
Absolutely, I can definitely relate to that. It seems like as being both a student and a scientist, it's like you're constantly kind of doing a little bit of everything. But I think it's really cool that you got to go to a conference. So for viewers, do you mind just telling a little bit about like what a conference is like in general? Because I know as a scientist, I didn't really start going to conferences until, of course, I got into undergrad and started really presenting my research. So can you tell a little bit about what that's like?
Yeah, so for a conference, my conference was a little bit different than most, but it's usually a collection of undergraduate students, practicing professionals, professors and activists was in my case, and everyone's just kind of convening together in one location. So mine had, my conference that I went to, it had a focus on conservation and human wildlife conflict and just the environment in general. So a lot of people were coming from all over the world. So there was people from Michigan State like myself, but there was also people who were working for World Wildlife Fund or for the Humane Society International, or were from Kenya originally. So it was a really interesting mix of people, but very exciting. And basically it's 3 days of going and learning as much as you can from all these people. So I gave an oral presentation on the work that I'll talk about later to a group of about probably 60 people. And it's very intimidating because I was also the youngest person by at least 5, if not 10 years at that conference. And it was really great, but very intimidating, but they're also just great opportunities to make connections and network. And just, I learned a lot during that time. It's a really great experience. And most of you will get that when you go onto your undergrad career and things.
Absolutely. That's so amazing. And it sounds so cool that there were so many different partners there to work with and scientists. So I think that's one of the my favorite thing about conferences in general is that you get to do meet so many different people and get to really kind of delve into your field even more. So I just thought that was a really cool experience that I wanted to highlight because not everybody gets to, have such a cool conference experience as you did. So that's really neat. And kudos for being the youngest person there. That's amazing. So
thank you. It was
a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, it was like the best sort of mess in a way, because I was also the first one to go on the first day of all the conferences, and I was the youngest one. So kind of like a trifecta of just, in my mind, like the worst scenario, but it ended up being a really, really great experience for me. And a lot of people learned from me, and I'm still talking to a lot of people from the conference. So it worked out, but like internalized anxiety and imposter syndrome, like associated with, am I doing the right thing? Are these people listening to me? And they are. It's just getting over your own like internal barriers associated with that.
Absolutely. Well, I want to learn a little bit more about what your everyday life looks like for you, but I definitely want to touch on some of the things that you talked about imposter syndrome and things like that a little bit later as well. So before we get into all of that, so I guess I have to just ask the question, like, what does an average day look like for you?
So an average day for me, I'm taking classes, and these these are kind of pictures of what I'm going through right now. All of my classes are remote, so probably a lot like a bunch of you're doing all of your classes online, and I have a combination of classes and meetings for my job and for my research positions. I'm also a foster, so that picture is our most recent foster kitten. We named her Miso, like the soup. And then I guess SpongeBob hyperventilating is just kind of it's what you feel like sometimes, and that's perfectly okay. These are unprecedented times, and it's perfectly normal to have like just an era of uncertainty, but also having that kind of perseverance to keep pushing on. So I'll just be doing classes and fostering and reading and doing my research. I'm also currently applying to graduate school, so I'm working on that as well. These are my own cats. On the left, that's Lizzo, and then on the right, that's Snuggles. We didn't name her Snuggles. It came with her, but it's absolutely perfect. She loves to snuggle. But yeah, I feel like a very normal day, very much online, but trying to break it up in things.
Right. And I think a lot of us are all experiencing that, this big shift to primarily being online. But I also have 2 kitties, so they have definitely been very helpful in all of my studies as well. So a nice little distraction from the, all the work of the day. So it's definitely been good to, have pets at home to keep me company. So I definitely, can understand that as well.
Right.
So my next question for you is, what's one of the coolest things you've either done or seen as part of your job?
So one of the coolest things is what I talked about a little bit before, is I was able to go and present at an international conference. And what was even better about that is that my university paid for it. So I didn't have to pay anything to be able to go and do this really amazing experience. This was my first conference that I presented at, and it was just an amazing experience that I never thought I would ever have, like in my undergraduate career, let alone in my life, just due to like financial limitations and just expectations. But that was one of the most memorable experiences of my life, is just traveling. I also traveled alone, so I was by myself going there. So that was also my first time abroad. So a lot of firsts for that, but just amazing experience that I was able to have. I also was fortunate enough to have an RAU fellowship, and that stands for Research Experience for Undergraduates. And that's sponsored by the National Science Foundation. And it's basically NSF, or National Science Foundation. They give students all over the country money to go and do summer research at different universities around the country. So mine was at the University of Maine, and I was able to go and hike at Acadia, which is on the left picture, with my 2 friends, Charlotte and Shayla, that I'm still friends with now. And I was also able to just go to the coast and help with seal rehabilitation. And it was just a really great experience that also came from my current research position in conservation criminology. And it's like a very invaluable part of my undergraduate research experiences.
So I also did an RU when I was also an undergrad. And so those are such valuable programs. So I think one thing I want to touch on, I actually have two questions for you. The first one is, what inspired you to get into criminology, and what really is the definition of criminology, or particularly wildlife criminology?
Sure. So it's actually kind of funny because for a large part of my life, I had intentions of going to veterinary school. And I kind of realized quickly in my undergrad that I didn't want to go to veterinary school just because I wasn't as passionate about the work and it wasn't making me as happy as I thought it would after like working in an emergency clinic and doing different like small jobs and internships. I just found I wasn't happy doing what I was doing. And I was always interested in conservation, and it kind of was like best, like right place, right time. I saw an email from my current PI. Her name's Dr. Meredith Gore. She was sending an email out just looking for an undergrad to join her lab. And she wanted someone who was fluent in French and knew this geographic information science programming software called ArcGIS. And I didn't know how to do either. But what she was describing in this project was kind of like meshing planet Earth and CSI like together. And it just sounded so amazing. And I couldn't not apply for that position, even though I wasn't qualified in any way. So I applied, and she emailed me probably like a week or two later. And she said, sorry, I'm in Madagascar, but we'll meet in January. And that's how our relationship started. And I met her, and we just talked for hours just about all the research she was doing, and we connected really well. And now I've worked with her for the past 2 years, and just her passion and her drive for the field got me more excited about it. And as I became more like immersed in the literature and in my own research, it just made me more excited about being within this field of conservation that not a lot of people talk about. Mm-hmm. And I guess I can touch on that a little bit. It's called conservation criminology, and it's meshing natural resource management, risk and decision science, and criminal justice. And it's basically looking at how consumptive human environment relationships work and how to go about kind of making them more sustainable as it pertains to like wildlife crimes, such as like ivory trafficking or natural resource trafficking or things like that. With my research specifically, I look at how women are involved in this sector, because in a lot of ways, women aren't being evaluated or accounted for in analyses or interventions pertaining to wildlife crime. And that's what I'm hoping to continue doing as I transition into graduate school.
That's so amazing. And that's such a unique way to look at it too, because I think so often we forget about the human aspect too of conservation, right? So I think we sometimes forget about, how we can play a role also in like how different, dynamics between whether gender or, any of these other things that we as humans, experience and talk about, like how that can also impact conservation. So I think that's a really good way, to talk, good point to bring up as well. And so my next question for you is, what innovation in your field are you most excited about?
Sorry, I'm looking at my notes as well. I guess within my field, it's still relatively developing, and I'm also like a rising scholar within this sector. I'm by no means an expert in this area, but I'm realizing more about how much more work that needs to be done. And at least with the research that I'm intending on doing and the stuff that I'm seeing, there's a greater drive for sustainability and for considerations of gender within the wildlife crime sector. Within this picture, these two pictures, it also shows like the legality and also the necessity attributed to these industries, and how a lot of people who are engaged within specifically wild meat trafficking, which is what I focus on, they're doing it out of necessity rather than out of greed. So having those considerations on how can we adapt these industries, but also account for the people who are dependent on these industries for their own survival. And I think by accounting for gender within this sector, we'd be able to answer that question more directly.
Absolutely. And we do also have a question that I think fits in really well here. And it's from our YouTube channel. So it's from Micah Plays YT. Do you do experiments with other scientists? So how is this, connect with other work that's going on right now?
Yeah, so my research is actually tied with the Wildlife Conservation Society, and there's a team in the Republic of Congo that we work with, and they're able to, since with my university and also just with current state, I'm not allowed to go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, but there is a team there through WCS that collects data for us and sends it back. And I also have international partners that are helping with the manuscript, and I'm also able to collaborate with and have conversations with. So it's less more about being physically with each other, but more connected kind of over Zoom or over email or just meeting randomly at conferences in some of my cases.
Right, perfect. And so my other question for you is, so as a woman, you mentioned really the roles that women play, not only within conservation, but also within science as well. You touched on that a little bit earlier. What kind of roles do women play in wildlife trafficking?
So women in, at least within my study sample, which is within urban wild meat trade, women can be a part of all parts of the supply chain that we found. So women can be offenders, defenders, observers, influencers, victims, or beneficiaries of urban wild meat trafficking. But I don't know the dimensions of this within other types of wildlife trafficking. So I should have referenced it before, but wild meat is basically any meat that comes from a wild animal. And urban wild meat trafficking means that it's happening within a city environment. So these are the trends that we've seen within our data within our urban wild meat trafficking sector. But I don't know how this would be like in a different city or how it would be with a different product, such as like with ivory. And that's something I want to try and figure out going forward.
Right. And so what are some of the solutions that you've kind of come across so far within your work and with, other science that are in this field? What are some things that people can do, either in, informing themselves or just knowing like, what would you hope that we could take away as somebody who doesn't work with this every day, of how, how this works and how, what we can do to kind of address these things and what we can do to, assist in your work at least?
I think something that would assist is being able to interact with conservation organizations that have an emphasis on helping the people and not just the animals, and being able to understand the idiosyncrasies that relate between humans and natural systems. So being able to, I guess, directly contribute to organizations or companies that are making efforts to make more sustainable interventions for, like, say, wildlife conservation related problems, but are doing it in a way that aren't affecting the people who are involved in these systems negatively.
Mhm. Absolutely. And so my next question is for you. You talked a little bit about your inspiration behind this work, but I noticed that, something that you mentioned right away that kind of always resonates with me is being a woman in STEM and how that has influences you as well. And so one thing that you mentioned, of course, is your advisor is a woman. And so could you talk a little bit more about that, about what is it like being a woman in, conservation criminology, and how your mentors have kind of influenced you in that way?
So Dr. Gore has influenced me immensely, and not just as like in a professional sense, she's also like given me a good example of who I want to be as a person, because who she is just like as a mother and then as a practicing scholar and just as a genuine like human being, she's just incredible. Like she's so smart, and just I could go on about her, but she has just always been super supportive with everything that I want to do, and has helped me like get these opportunities that I never would have thought possible before. And so it's just made me realize like how important good mentorship is to have, and how like influential other women can be on each other, and just having that kind of community and that kind of security within a field as like within conservation specifically, it's very white heteronormative male dominated. So being able to be advised by a woman who is breaking these glass ceilings and is helping me to also break them is just very, very inspiring and very impactful. And I'm just so fortunate that I was able to connect with her and have been able to work with her for so long.
No, absolutely. And I think I also, when I was an undergrad, I had a woman mentor in STEM, and she didn't actually do anything in marine biology, but she did primatology actually. So totally different fields, but she was also such a huge mentor for me and just showed me, really what you said about like breaking the glass ceiling and having somebody who, is not just there for you in the good times, but also, through the challenges as well, is something that's so essential. So I think it's so important to have representation in these fields, to see other people who look like you, who are, can understand your struggles to help you get to the next, stage in your career. Because I mean, realistically, we need everybody to be addressing these, issues, particularly in conservation, because they are such large issues. So
Right.
my next question for you is, are there any hardships you've had to overcome, and how did you do that?
I think a lot of times within conservation is you don't see, at least in my case, I don't see myself like in the pages of the work that I'm in or what I'm doing. So it's very hard to find connections to the work when so many people are kind of fighting against you, like kind of Xing you out of a space because they have like some expectation that a person who looks like you shouldn't be in that space, which can be really damaging. But then being able to find a community that is able to help uplift you and help you like remind yourself like why you're in this space. So one of my friends, her name's Wawa Gabaru, she started Black Girl Environmentalists, and it's a really great new organization just helping other Black girls in the environment. And being able to be in this community and also be friends with someone like Wawa is just amazing. And I think it's really helpful in just reminding you, like, no matter like how often you don't see yourself like in these spaces, like there's other people who are starting to become like a part of these spaces, like myself included, to make it more inclusive and more accepting.
No, I love that. And that is such a cool organization. So I'm glad that you highlighted that as well, so that our viewers can see that. And so the next question I have for you actually ties in with one that we got from one of our YouTube watchers. So we have from Miss Young's class, we have Rayon would like to know, is educating populations about sustainable hunting something you teach? And do you find there's more of a need to educate poachers versus native tribes?
That's a really good question. So I haven't directly given conversations about sustainable hunting, but it is something that I'm going to be pursuing in my graduate studies, because I believe there is a way to be hunting sustainably within these local communities. And I want to take knowledge from the local indigenous tribes and use that to influence the other people who are hunting either recreationally or within that area. But when it comes to poachers, I have a different perspective with that, just because a lot of times people who are poaching, they're doing it out of necessity unless it's directly for like ivory poaching. But for the people who are hunting, say like in national parks and are getting meat for their families, I want to more find the root on how can we make it so that you have more secure access to food, rather than how can I make you stop poaching? Because I feel like poaching within that aspect is more of a secondary problem for those people, because I can't go to someone who is trying to feed their family and say you should be caring about the wildlife when they're trying to feed their families. So if there's a way that I can implement a sustainable change in nutrition allocation and I'm forgetting the word, but there's a different way that I can talk to people about getting their food sources more sustainably, and that leads to a decrease in poaching or a decrease in unsustainable harvest of wildlife, and that's awesome. But ultimately, I am going to want to help the people that are affected in these landscapes, and then helping the wildlife should be able to come and follow that after.
Absolutely. No, I can definitely agree with, couldn't agree with you more there. When I was through part of my research, I worked a lot with fishing communities, and I know there's so many different things that get thrown out there about like sustainable fishing and whatnot. And it's really more about, learning how to work in these communities and work with the people who are using nature and wildlife to, sustain themselves and their families, rather than, some of the bigger issues where it's just like more of a, like you mentioned about ivory and poaching and whatnot. And so those are more of less they're not really using it for their livelihoods all the times for certain people. Sometimes it's more of just a trade for something else. So I definitely couldn't agree with you more. It's definitely a very tricky field to be in. So I commend you for that, because there's a lot of different values that you have to really work with. And people sometimes are more complicated than nature at times. So my next question for you is from Khadijah. And she would like to know, was there a single event growing up that inspired you to pursue sustainability as an adult?
So I lived very close to the Detroit Zoo, and I used to go to the Detroit Zoo, or I still kind of do, all the time in the summer. My family had a membership, and they just were very fostering of my love for the environment and for animals. And I remember there was a sustainability like diorama they kind of put up, just showing the trends from like how trash in the area get into the ocean. And that just kind of stuck with me forever and turned me into kind of a very aggressive 8-year-old environmentalist, but very necessary and has very much influenced who I am today. And I've just kind of carried that with me ever since I was probably 8 years old, just having this care for the environment and for the natural world. And I've been vegetarian and since I was 8, and then I've been vegan for the past 6 years, which is a privilege in and of itself, and kind of like a question like, why are you working with meat when you're vegan? But that's a whole different conversation. But it's definitely been a part of me for as long as I can remember, and has been very much influenced by that diorama and just being stuck in my head.
For sure. And I think it really highlights, you mentioned part of your job is really helping to educate as well. And I think that's something that's so important, is passing that on. And I also was very inspired by aquariums and zoos when I was younger. And that really helped me get into marine biology, was that initial interest. So I think it's so important that the work that you're doing as well, in terms of helping to educate the next generation as well, to help get them inspired in such a field as this. Our next question is actually really interesting. It's from also Rayan, and she says, it appears that this area of science is more aligned with the patriarchy. Are you finding more women are finding their way into this field over time?
So I can't say for the United States, because I remember I sent out a tweet. I'm working on my graduate applications right now for PhD programs. And I was talking to my advisor, and we were just talking about representation within our small field. And I was like, I wonder if there's other Black women in the United States who are working in this field. And I sent out a tweet because I have a decent amount of followers on Twitter. And I was like, it's probably going to reach someone in the United States who's working on this. And I think I'm the only one right now, just going off of Twitter and off of what I've been trying to find as a Black woman who is working within this field. So in the United States, there's definitely more like in Africa and in other countries, or continents. Yeah, you know what I mean? I'm sorry. But yeah, so I think broadly, if you're considering conservation as like a whole field, I feel like more women of color and people of color are going into this field in general. Within my subsect, I'm hoping to encourage more people of color to go into sustainable means of human environment interactions and resolution to these types of problems.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't. I'm sorry. Well, I first of all just want to say that, I'm sorry that you have found it difficult to find other people doing the work that you're doing, because I totally understand how important it is to find other community in that, right? And so, but kudos to you as well for pioneering, in the United States, that this field as well, because I think it's so important for other people to see that this is a field that everybody can go into. And honestly, I didn't really know all that much about conservation criminology until this call. So I've learned so much already from you. So it's definitely a really fascinating thing too. And it's also, I thought it was interesting that the question used the word patriarchy too, because I think it's so complex that a lot of these issues that you're dealing with every day deal with so many diverse people and cultures and backgrounds. And so it's really, you can't work with one person doing this kind of work over and over and over again, because you lose that connection and you lose that ability to really have lasting impact. So I'm grateful that you're in this field, because we definitely need more women like you doing this kind of work.
Thank you. Sorry, that was just,
but so I do want to get to our next question, because I think it is really important. And we're kind of been touching on these themes all along, but it's, how does your work contribute to a sustainable future?
So I feel like my work is contributing to a sustainable future, because as there's more people are going to be ending up on our planet, and as the climate is going to be changing, people are going to be interacting with environmental spaces more often than not. So being able to create an influence of sustainable interaction, and interaction that is like not as consumptive or negatively consumptive as it can be, is necessary going forward with the state that our environment is in right now, and with the state of urbanization and the migration from like rural environments to urban environments. More people will be living in cities by 2050 than rural environments, I believe. I don't want to come up with a percentage. I know it's a lot to a little. I apologize for that. But I believe that my work is helping kind of give us a better understanding of how to combat and intervene in these conservation scenarios by accounting for women. And I think it's a very promising change that can be brought to encourage a more sustainable future.
Absolutely. And now my next question for you is, what advice would you give to students who may be interested in pursuing a career in this field or any of the fields that you've kind of mentioned before?
So I would recommend reading. Just read as much as you can. This picture on the left is one of my favorite books, and it just gives a good idea of how to do conservation in a way that is long lasting for the people who live in the landscape that the conservation is taking place in. So in this case, it took place in Afghanistan, and it was establishing the first national park in Afghanistan. And it was just a really great kind of memoir about how to implement conservation in a way where you're not taking from the people that are there, but you're helping them gain independence and autonomy in their own conservation initiatives. And also just reading broadly. So reading fiction, nonfiction, social sciences, hard sciences, just being able to have like a vast array of knowledge that you're able to kind of figure out what areas you're interested in, and then it'll help you direct into what you want to do going forward. I would also recommend saying no. There's a lot of power to saying no, and being able to say no. It's an exercise of your right to good mental health, and also prioritizing your time in the way that is best for you. And saying no to things that do not benefit you emotionally, mentally, physically, or spiritually is extremely important in regards to maintaining your time and energy. And this took me a long time to figure out, because I was kind of stretching myself too thin. And if I'm doing that, I'm not able to do the things that I actually care about or that are bettering myself in some way to its full capacity. So being able to say no isn't you being a quitter or you being a negative person. It's you respecting what matters to you and what is building to you as a person.
No, that's perfect. And I think that's so true. That's something that I definitely have struggled with and still struggle with, is learning how to say no. So that is something that I think that I was recently even talking with one of my mentors about. And she said that our generation and the generations like coming up after us are so often focused about doing so many different things. And then sometimes like that doesn't actually benefit students in the long run. So I think it's about finding what you love and reading about, exploring all of your different options and reading, like you mentioned, but also, learning when you really find something that you like, how to go after that. So I think that's a fantastic piece of advice. But I also want to mention one question that I have for you. And you mentioned a lot about the REU, the Research Experiences for Undergraduates program, and other conferences that you've attended. What advice would you give to students for getting involved in programs like that? Or what could they do to really help, elevate their background so that they're able to do these things?
I think just not being afraid to reach out when you don't have experience. I've learned to do that often. It's more often than not, it has amounted to something that has benefited me in some way. So that's how I got my current research position with Dr. Meredith Gore. This picture right here, I was actually selected as a Princeton EEB scholar, and that they sent me to Princeton University, and I was able to present my research and interact with faculty. And it was a really great experience. I made further connections there. And that ultimately led to the research that I did this past summer with a faculty at MSU. So just kind of applying broadly to things and just casting out your net really wide, and just, I think just not being afraid of rejection and being okay with applying to things that you're not 100%. I'm trying to word this in a better way because I just kind of look for things that I think would benefit me in some way and I apply. And if there's no application fee that's hindering it, I would recommend just applying to things that you want to do, regardless of the qualifications or the expectations that you have for yourself, I think.
No, that's perfect. I think that's so true. And it's just, what do you, and so this is another question I actually have for you, but I want to get to make sure I answer the question that just came in. That is pretty fantastic. And so this is from one of our viewers, and it sounds like he's the birthday boy. So happy birthday, RC.
Happy birthday.
And he has a fun question for you. He says, I love your mug. In an epic battle, which do you pull first? Rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock?
Lizard all the way.
Lizard? Okay.
Always has to be lizard.
That's perfect. And so I also have one other question for you myself, and that is, you mentioned about applying to these different programs and casting out your net wide. Can you talk about a time that you've maybe failed or feel like you failed, and how you've overcome that? Because I know when I was applying to internships, I got a lot more rejections sometimes than I got acceptances. So what do you do when you find that you haven't been accepted to something that you want?
Right. So in high school, I applied to, I think, 5 schools, and I only got into 2 because I kind of went beyond my expectations for like the amount of experience that I had. And I applied to schools that were really out of my reach at the time. And I just wasn't, honestly, I wasn't honest with myself and like what I was doing, because I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted to go into or what I was doing. And I actually reread like my personal statements, and they were just atrocious. And at the time, I was devastated. I felt like I had failed because I didn't get into my top choice school. And the schools that I did get into, one of them I couldn't afford, and the other one, it was in the middle of Vermont. And I ended up going to that one. But it was just a time where I think I didn't account for the things I had done. Like, I am going to college. I'm going to college on almost a full scholarship, and I'm able to, thank you, that I'm not at that school anymore. So it kind of sucks, but, but where was I at? Sorry. But I wasn't taking account for the things I had done, and I was only focusing on the negative, which is very common when you're in those spaces and when you're getting like all these rejections just from applying to colleges. And I think going to Vermont was the best thing for me, because that's how I was able to kind of realize that I didn't want to go to veterinary school, and I was able to transfer to Michigan State, where I had a better education for myself and more scholarship opportunities than I was afforded in Vermont, even though it was very generous there. But I also had a midlife crisis. That was me deciding not to go to veterinary school. I did a wildlife rehabilitation internship the summer right before I came to Michigan State. So on the left, that's me being really cool, holding a red-tailed hawk. And on the right, that's me feeding some fawns. One of them actually broke my toe at the time, but I'm okay now. But I have a little like scar from their little hooves. But it definitely, like going to Vermont and kind of like having a redirection of my career path and what my intentions were, it just helped me get these different experiences and helped me grow as a person. So even when there is something where there is a shortcoming, like me not going to my top choice school resulted in me being where I'm at now. And I don't think I would trade that to be able to go to like my top choice school at the time, because I wouldn't have the life that I have now.
No, that's so perfect. And I love that you talked a little bit about, looking back and kind of seeing your journey through this, because I think sometimes I also did many things throughout my undergrad career where it was like, these things just weren't the right fit. And even now as a PhD student, I'm still trying to figure out my pathway and finding things that fit and things that don't fit. So I think that's something that, not restraining yourself to one particular idea of how you see the future sometimes can be really beneficial, because it gives you the chance to explore and be real with yourself, as you talked about, and finding what things actually clicked for you. So I, again, commend you so much for all that you've done so far. And, of course, as you continue to go on to graduate school and do amazing other things as well. So I imagine we're going to see you back here doing even cooler things in the future for sure.
You.
But with that, I want to thank you so much, Elena, for joining us. You can stay in touch with Elena and keep up with her tremendous work. Here are links to her social channels, website, and even her direct email. And so thank you so much again, Elena.
No problem. And if any of you have any questions, please reach out. I will definitely help in any way I can, or even if you just want to have a Zoom call and just learn more, I'd be more than happy to do that. So thank you.
And definitely take her up on that. I can definitely encourage you, students right now who are watching this, that, having amazing mentors like Elena can help you get into this field if that's something that you're interested in. So definitely take her up on all of those different ways to connect. And next, I want to welcome everybody to our EarthEcho. We are currently inviting young people who want to take action to protect the ocean to join us this Saturday, November 14th, for a Youth Action Network meetup. We have extended the registration deadline to tonight, exclusively for students tuning in for this event. So visit earthecho.org/youth for more details and to register. You can also be sure to stay connected with EarthEcho on our social media channels. Visit earthecho.org to find out more information about all of our exciting programs. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you go. And on behalf of EarthEcho International, thank you for joining us, and keep exploring.